Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Paul Polman. You'll notice that we're missing Deborah. That's because it would be about 5:30 in the morning her time. If she does pop up, she'll pop up silently. But we had to rearrange because of the storms yesterday in the UK. So thank you, Paul, for your flexibility for continuing to join us. We're delighted. You're well known for your role as a business leader. You've led Unilever for a long time, but what many people don't know is that you've been working in the field of disability inclusion, particularly innovating in the field around low vision and no vision. So can you tell us a bit about this and how you came to be engaged in the field?
Well, thank you, Neil and Antonio, and thank you for the opportunity, obviously, and more importantly, for what you're doing. You know, and I worked a lot on the Millennial Development Goals and now the Sustainable Development Goals, and they have a simple objective to not leave anybody behind. And I've always believed that if we want to save humanity and create a world that is inclusive and working for all, we have to fight for some of the basic principles that I believe are universal. Principles like dignity and respect for everybody, equity and compassion. I became especially aware of that in 2005 when one of my friends, Eric Weyenmeyer, who was visually impaired at the age of 16 and actually the first blind person to climb all 7 summits, including Mount Everest, he called me and he said, "Paul, do you fancy climbing Mount Kilimanjaro together? Because I'd like to go back there." I said, "Eric, I'm game. This is such an incredible experience." But then we expanded the concept and decided to take a blind person with us from all parts of the world. And with 8 of us, we climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. The first blind person from Kenya, Douglas Sidialo, a person from Japan, from Austria, and so forth. 6 of us reached the top. And then when we came down, we went to the blind schools in Arusha or Moshi and the cities around Kilimanjaro. And we found the situation to be dear. And that got us galvanized into action. You know, we cannot change our values if we don't change what we value. And it is very important that we value this total inclusion. There are 40 million blind people in the world, 285 million visually impaired, if you want to, 20 million children, and less than 10% of those are in education. So it was very a tough challenge, especially in that part of the world. But I'm not afraid of a tough challenge. So I thought we need to attack this and do something about it and leave a lasting legacy, if you want to. Gandhi said it very well when he said that our ability to reach unity and diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization. So I always felt it was right from a moral point of view, but also actually from an enormous economic point of view. And what I discovered as I went into this, that we had a long way to go, not only in Africa, but all across the world in normalizing the situation for people with disabilities. Only 5% here in the UK of the FTSE companies actually publicly disclose their commitments to disability. 7% of the C-suite who have disability disclose it. So very few people actually are willing to talk about it still. And more than half the companies in the world, which was a great surprise to me, rather pay fines than complying with the law to include people with disabilities. So I thought this has to change. The world cannot work if we don't include for all. And I think COVID has added an extra dimension to that. It has made us realize that people that are already in difficult positions, minorities or marginalized communities, are paying the higher price for our failings. And for people with disability, that has even been more true, which makes us even more determined to try to do something about it. And it's obviously, as you know, Neil, better than I do, an enormous opportunity. We're talking here about 15% of the world population, which is the largest minority group, if you want to, a spending power estimated at $8 trillion. At a time that we're looking for talent, an enormous talent pool, but also an enormous pool that you want to have associated with your companies. And I've always believed that business can and should be a major force for change. And this is one of the burning issues still on the agenda that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. So for those of our audience that don't know, the innovation that we were talking about was something called Orbit, which revolutionized Braille. So for those of you that are not familiar with Braille readers, they tended to be made out of thousands of moving parts, which is really, really expensive, which is why a Braille display or reader used to cost thousands of dollars per machine. Now, the Orbit project used a different technology to create the pins that pushed it up and slashed the cost by 90%. And that's the revolutionary part of what you were doing, working with a pal of mine, Kevin Carey, who was the chairman of RNIB at the time, and loading up these readers with books as well. So not only are you giving access to information, you're providing a library of information to the individuals that get these much more affordable devices. So a little bit more about Orbit from you would be great.
Oh, and there's no problem about that, Neil. In fact, when we looked at the situation of blind people, we said we have to do something about it. We cannot just be silent bystanders. So we created the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust, which is incorporated now as the biggest charity for the visually impaired in Africa. We're in 6 countries. Our headquarters are in Kenya. And the main objective is really unlocking literacy for life. So we ensure that visually impaired children are enrolled in schools, obviously have access to the right tools, like the Orbit itself. We provide educational material, training, advocacy, and we're slowly but surely expanding out of East Africa into other countries. We reckon we are touching about 25,000 children now with our limited means, but are certainly seen as the most recognized organization. We were dealing with the Perkins Braille machine that you rightfully described was a very useful tool, but expensive and actually inefficient. You could not put books on there. Children that were visually impaired, Harry Potter's book would come out. If you're lucky in Africa, you might have access to a Braille book 3 or 4 years later when the conversations have changed, or having to share exams in school, having to share one Braille machine amongst 4 or 5 visually impaired people, situations that would never have given you a chance to develop to your fullest potential. Now we are rapidly moving to ensuring that every child in school has an Orbit. Think about it as your iPad. You can put an unlimited amount of books on there. You can put curriculum on there. You can even put STEM now on there, which is quite revolutionary for Braille. And we have come up with the Orbit people with a device that teachers can actually don't need to know Braille, but can actually follow on a normal telephone or other device what the visually impaired students are typing. What we've seen with COVID as well is when the schools were closed, Uganda just opened after 2 years of closure, for example. These children still have access to the Orbit and can actually study at home, and it totally changes their lives. And increasingly, we're moving not only to giving them the tools to educate themselves, but the most important thing, obviously, is to unlock their full potential for life. So we're working with students now at university level. We're working increasingly with companies to place these people, and that's obviously a very rewarding thing to do. And hopefully we can soon expand with help of everybody to the various places in Africa first, but then globally as the need is enormous, as you can imagine.
Well, it's extremely interesting to see how we can connect to different other parts of the world and able to empower other people that are usually, when we read the news every day, we know that there are a few countries that dominate this space, and sometimes African countries get a little bit forgotten. So from that journey that you went through there, what do you believe helped you to be a better leader?
Yeah, it is very rewarding to see, and actually it keeps us in one sense modest and honest with a certain level of humility and humanity. If you see a blind girl say, I want to be the Minister of Education so that in my country I can change the plight of visually impaired children. Or I met another blind boy the other day who wants to be a doctor so that he can prevent the same issues in other people. It really keeps you with both feet on the ground and makes you realize what life ultimately is all about.
You mentioned previously that we still have a long way to go, and you mentioned a few examples from the UK. What do you believe that other executives from other companies need to do for us to move forward and to make sure that their workforces are feel included and are able to say, I have a disability, I need help. What we need to reach that step?
Well, as I said, the first one is, it is a moral obligation. The world cannot function if we leave others behind. And I think the moral case is well understood. But increasingly also for the business community, you have to make them understand the enormous economic case of this. This is an enormous purchasing power, an enormous talent pool that you can tap into. And yet it suffers still from many of the myths that keep the people behind. The chances of employment are significantly less in every country in the world. The myth that you go up against are all fallacies, in fact, that people with disabilities must be less productive, must be more sick, must be less loyal, must be more costly. All these things have proven themselves wrong. So actually it starts with creating the awareness, and this is where the valuable 500, for example, comes in. You need to lead the people to the water if you want to, and share best practices. Companies like Atos, who have worked on the accessibility of people with disabilities, who have increased the sensitivity within your own organization, built it into all of these HR policies, etc., is the first thing, is create awareness, not only of the enormous economic potential behind this, but also about the busting these myths. And once you have these awareness, then it is important that you make commitments. Very few companies disclose actually or are aware of the status of LGBT. We've attacked to some extent gender. We've attacked the issues of LGBT. We've dealt with other issues, but for some reason, disability has still stayed as a sideshow, if I may call it that way. So make yourself aware of where you are in the organization and set yourself the audacious goals that are needed. When I retired from Unilever, after 10 years being CEO, I did not want, and nor did I need, any retirement present. So I said, the biggest present you can give me is to make a firm commitment that you're going to hire more people with disability. And what I was very pleased about was that my retirement present was a commitment by 2025 to at least have 5% of our workforce be people with disabilities, or disabilities as you call it, and to become the number one choice of people with disabilities as an employer. I could not have wished of a better present, but make these bold commitments. And then not only make these bold commitments, be part of the network like the Valuable 500, where you get the best practices, learnings from others, to then implement it in your organizations. But it can only be done if it is from the top down. In any organization, you will find roadblocks, you will find reasons not to. So it needs that leadership from the top to solve this issue at an accelerated rate.
Yeah, so I'm proud to be part of the board of Valuable 500, and Access Chat has been supporting Valuable since before it became Valuable. What was your journey to become chair of Valuable 500? Because we know it, but it'd be great to hear from your point of view how Caroline persuaded you. Not that you probably needed much persuading.
Well, if you the saying goes, if you want something to be done, enroll a busy person. And I was not looking for more work, but obviously a combination of my passion in the field, from my work with the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust we just talked about as my own foundation, my firm beliefs, having helped develop the Sustainable Development Goals that we should not leave anybody behind. I also obviously got touched by the infectious passionism and optimism that Caroline has. And I'm very honored also to chair with you and be part of the advisory board with you, Neil. I know you're equally passionate about that area. You know, it is very important. I've always believed that, and I've written this book, Net Positive, How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take, that it is important to get the business community enrolled. You know, the business community at the end is 65% of the global economy, 80% of the financial flow, 95% of the job creation. If we don't get this firmly embedded in the business as an integral part of their strategies, we will never get there. And that's obviously where I've spent my whole life and feel the most comfortable. I met Caroline in 2017 in Colombia. I also chair another advisory board, which is of One Young World, a wonderful group of young people coming together to rise to a higher level of moral consciousness. And Caroline was on stage. I had just arrived by plane from Europe, and it was late for my body, and I had some jet lag. So I thought, well, let me go to the event venue and just pop in to stay awake, but also to get a little bit of the smell of the place, because I had to give a keynote the next day. And literally, as I walk in, Caroline was on stage with some other wonderful people that were there. And so as she was talking, and I'd never met her before, although we had crossed paths apparently in the past when One Young World was in Ireland, she was on the stage and said, wouldn't it be wonderful to have at least the CEOs that are here come forward and make a commitment to improve their representation of people with disability in their workforce. And she then actually evoked my name and said, if Paul Polman would be here, that would be a wonderful signal to have him be part of this. I thought it was a setup. Caroline convinced me until today that it was not. But at the end of the day, I went up to the stage and we were emotionally crying. We got these CEOs to commit, and that was the start of the Valuable 500. We increased our objective and our vision behind it. But now we have $8 trillion of revenue, over 500 of the biggest companies, 22 million employees, 13 iconic members, and really companies that are enormous in size. I'm talking about the Allianz or the Googles or the Atos or the Vodafones or Verizons and the P&Gs and the Unilevers of this world. So we can be very proud that for the first time, hopefully, we have created this community that collectively not only makes its commitment, but also then links it to clear action to drive it forward and change these statistics, which are in desperate need of repair, if I may call it that way.
Yeah. So talking about how we drive that change and how we systematize this, obviously you've just written the book Net Positive, and we talk about sustainable development goals. One of the things that I've been passionate about is actually making sure that we include disability clearly in sustainability and in the way that we embed this in organizations. So I've talked for a while now about treating exclusion like pollution, but actually applying the same kind of framework that we do with decarbonization, because disability exclusion is an externality. It's a negative externality of the way that businesses operate. And at the same time, when we make stuff accessible and inclusive, you have the positive externality that everybody can use it. It's easier for people. It generates inclusion, tax revenues for organizations, etc. So this is something that we're doing within my own organization, but that I'm wishing to sort of proselytize and get out there so that people can understand and grasp the concept. How do we help organizations sort of conceptualize these things? Do we need different economic models than we currently are? Do we need to think about things like donut economics? Are those frameworks helpful for business leaders to conceptualize what they need to do so that we're going from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism and a more holistic view of what business can do for society?
Yeah, it gets to the heart of the book, what I wrote, Neil, that we need to reframe what good looks like. And I like your phrase, exclusion is pollution. And if you don't mind, I'll borrow it with pride because it's such a simple but powerful way to capture it. And it is clear that we have chased the wrong goals. When a measure like GDP was invented to measure success of a country, it was really only measured as only designed as a tool for industrial output. When Simon Koshnik did that in the 50s or 60s, he said, don't really use it as a goal to measure your success because it doesn't measure negative externalities. It doesn't measure the finite resources. It doesn't talk about fair income distribution. And here we are with two of the biggest challenges in the world. Although we have lifted so many people out of poverty, we have started to realize that this is the way we are doing this is frankly unsustainable. We cannot have unlimited growth or output like this on a finite planet, and anything you can do forever is by definition unsustainable. And increasingly we're realizing that issues like climate change and inequality are actually two sides of the same coin. COVID, as I mentioned again once more, has shown that it's the people that are disadvantaged or in marginalized jobs or already are paying the bigger or higher price of our shortcomings, are again paying a disproportionate price for things like COVID. So we have to step up if we want to make this world, if we want to make it function and function for all. We have to be sure that we attack the burning issue of climate change, but that we also attack the equally important issue of inequality. And more people understand that. And that is why you see actually a drive to redefining what success looks like and move away from GDP increasingly towards an overall well-being index. You know, it is ridiculous that we value wars or pollution or cutting down trees, if you want to, because it drives up our GDP, but that we don't value the quality of education, peace, the air that we can breathe, or the fact that we can live together in an inclusive environment, in a safe environment. So that is really the change that needs to happen. There's the genuine progress indicator, or the human development index, or the happy planet index, or the gross national happy index. And I can give you more and more of these initiatives that are popping up across the world that some countries are already starting to adapt to properly define what success looks like. Now, the good thing about this is that the world has woken up. I think one of the major efforts that is taking place is the establishment of the Sustainable Standard Board, where next to optimizing the return on financial capital, now more and more people have realized also that we also need to include environmental and social capital as a minimum on equal footing. We have seen increasingly governments adjust and adapt their legislation as well. Requirements to publish the numbers of the workforce diversity in LGBT and in gender, but increasingly also, hopefully, with people with disabilities. Adapting laws and frameworks to make sure that companies act in an inclusive way. The disability acts that are coming in different places. So we've started to see this broader awareness of what needs to be addressed, but also the willingness to do something about it. And what this is all about, obviously, is jumping on that trend, but accelerating it. Because what is missing, like on climate change, what is missing on inclusion is that we probably are aware of what needs to be done, but that we're not moving at the speed and scale. And having now 500 of the biggest companies with this economic force of over $8 trillion in revenue is probably enough to create a tipping point, and this is what we're all focused on.
Paul, behind me on the wall, I have a magazine, a Wired magazine with Al Gore in these days saying, "This is we are at a climate crisis." Now we have been talking. How can we make sure that all these delays, and it was many years ago. How can we find a way that we don't get on kind of a trap and we end up in a similar situation in relation to disability?
Yeah, so that's very important. And I think the awareness is moving up. It is the zeitgeist, if you want to. and COVID has really seen a shift in collective consciousness, but also a shift in commitments of action to do something about it. So we need to be sure, first and foremost, that in the debate of building back better, that we also put in terms of equality or the just transition that people talk, that we put in the rights of people with disabilities. I think it's not well understood yet that we're talking here about a population of 1.3 billion people, 15% of the world's population, the biggest minority group, that most of the disabilities happen between the age of 20 and 65, that it could happen to all of us. And so we have to destigmatize. That is the first thing. And I think with efforts like the Valuable 500, it goes a long way in that direction. The second thing we have to do is, it's very difficult for companies alone to really move the needle at scale. So we need to form these partnerships. I always say that we should not compete on the future of humanity, and companies that understand that collaborative leadership is more important than competitive leadership will be doing well. And here we have 500 of the most iconic companies in the world, including Atos, being part of this effort, collectively creating and sharing the knowledge, collectively driving each other to higher levels. I believe we can get to move the needle forward in a significant way. And then the third element is to use that collective power to also drive the advocacy. There's no question about it that our multilateral institutions, our governments, have it very difficult at this time. We're seeing an increase in populism, nationalism, xenophobia, multilateral institutions not quite functioning, major distractions geopolitically that take away from this agenda. So as a business community, we have the obligation to collectively raise our voices to ensure that governments implement the right policies, and that governments obviously put the right frameworks in place to ensure that everybody then starts to implement these more inclusive strategies. Right now, for example, in the US, in the Disability Act, there is no minimum wage for people with disability. That's unacceptable. When COVID came in the UK, they wanted to deprioritize people with disability to have access to the vaccines that became available. That's unacceptable. So if we don't work together to also ensure that governments individually and collectively put the right policies in place, I'm afraid we would not get to these tipping points that we're after.
No, I think something that we need to look at this not as a campaign, that as a permanent narrative. Is something that we need to talk every day. It needs to. I think that's something that we need to do as part of our commitment with the topic that we are so passionate about.
I could not agree more.
It's definitely, disability is a thread in the fabric of society. So if we don't include that, the talking about that thread, then it gets left behind, it gets siloed, we lose that progress.
What I find, Neil, is that people are working a lot with the blind. They've always dealt with uncertainty in their lives. They always had to cope with the unexpected. They always had to use technology to actually enhance their capabilities. Often now technology has given them the possibility to actually do even more than non-visually impaired people or sighted people, if you want to. But also they've always learned how to live in this VUCA world of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And at a time that the world is even changing faster and faster, these people are actually better positioned than many of us who don't have to deal with these disabilities. So the inclusion, where we see this in companies, and I've seen the same in Unilever, I'm sure you've seen the same in Atos, the inclusion of people with disabilities at higher numbers in your company just absolutely lifts the total organization and positions you better for a more challenging future.
Absolutely. So we're used to dealing with complexity, ambiguity, and problem solving, and every business needs problem solvers, especially right now. So one last question before we have to close, and that, or rather a sort of topic, and that's quite often there have been this idea that disability inclusion should be sort of charitable, and that when you're doing business with people with disabilities that shouldn't really make money from it. My view is that actually there is nothing wrong with making good money out of doing good things. And if anything, we should be making lots of money out of it to make it attractive to businesses. So how can we create that attraction for businesses to engage in the topic, rather than just the sort of the macroeconomic figures, but get them really engaged on, how does this sort of embed into how they sell or provide services to their community?
Well, you raise an interesting point, Neil, and listening to your question and reflecting on it, business needs profits to survive, but profits are like white blood cells in your body. We need white blood cells to live, but I've never met an individual that actually lives for its white blood cells. So business itself needs profits to survive, but it needs a higher order, a higher purpose to be able to be successful long term, to be able to attract employees, have a higher level of engagement, etc. And that higher purpose can only come from representing these basic values of inclusion, dignity, and respect, equity. And if businesses neglect that at all of its levels, it ultimately will not be successful. That's the essence of the book that we've written to Net Positive. So businesses that understand that they internalize and take responsibility of these gaps that we still see in society, be it the environmental gaps or the social gaps that we have now solved, not only discover that it's an enormous opportunity to be successful, the spending power of people with disabilities, etc. Not only is it an enormous opportunity, but it is also an imperative to be successful as an organization long term. You simply will not be able to attract talent if you say, I'm only hiring white males, or I'm only taking care of people with disabilities, or I'm only doing LGBT. You have to have an integral approach where we ensure that we reflect society, that we make it inclusive for all, and unlock that full potential that comes with it to be long-term successful.
Thank you very much, Paul. And we need to also thank MyClearText for keeping us captioned, and really look forward to you joining us on Twitter on Tuesday night. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
I look forward to that. Thanks to both of you. Be safe.